Welcome to the Financial Pathway Podcast. We're here to help you go to the next level in your finances with practical advice from speaker and financial planner Nate Skelly.
Luke Clayton, welcome back to the podcast.
I'm back, and I'm ready. It's time. It's been I don't know how long it's been. I don't keep score. For the record, You keep score. You've given me some grief before for not having you on my podcast enough. So
I think you've had me on your podcast, I think once a year, and I know we've done at least one podcast. I think two. So maybe this is your third appearance back on the podcast, but that would be rarefied air because I think maybe only my dad I've recorded 3 podcasts with before. So you should actually feel honored by that.
That actually is to be on the same level as Dr. Kurt Skelly at all that's an honor in any way.
Yeah, he's my dad. I know him in real life. He's really not that great, so that actually is not that great of a compliment.
Yeah, he's great from the pulpit, but behind the scenes,
a little bit overrated. Yeah. And I know he's listening to this too, so I got to be careful about what I say.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, hey, sir, we love you. Only nice things to say.
Yeah. Well, Luke, I wanted to have you back. We have a lot of overlap in the fact that we both run businesses, and really they're solo businesses. We do have some help, but as far as we're not in some larger corporate structure. We're not in ministry specifically, although a lot of the work that we do overlaps with people who are in ministry. But what I wanted to do is just have a conversation about tools and methods and tips and tricks that you've discovered for time management, for productivity. And I think no matter who's listening, no matter what job you're in, these are things that would be helpful for everybody. Let's start here. Just tell people, for those who are not familiar, tell us about what you do and your business.
Yeah. So I am essentially a creative professional is kind of the broad term. And I've been in business now as Must Increase Media for 8.5 years, I want to say. Or wait, hold up. Nope. Yeah, that's it. Like the number matters. I just wanted to be right for my own sake. But so I will say probably the biggest mistake that I made early on was not being focused enough on a particular service. And so I kind of started as just like, hey, because my background is I used to work for a church as a creative media director. And so I just kind of said, hey, if you are a business, specifically though a church, and you need help in anything creative, graphic design, video, website, blah, 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 fill in the blank, I'm your guy. So I cast a super wide net. And the drawback on that is, like I said, I didn't necessarily focus in on one service and really, do the most I could for that one thing and maybe master a skill. The positive side, though, is that over the years, it really has helped to be a one-stop shop for the churches that I do work with. So if they need design and website and video, and now even I'm doing more with podcasting, they can essentially get the vast majority of their actual service from me. So that's what I do. I am focusing a little bit more now on a lot of the podcast production side of things. That has just really taken off. A lot of people are calling the 2024 presidential election the podcast election because it had such an influence seemingly on the outcome. And so podcasting is bigger now more than ever. And so I've helped a lot of people start their podcast. I've helped a lot of people maintain their podcast and their YouTube presence and things like that. So I'm really diving into that more as I go into the new year. Tell us
a little bit more about that. Like you mentioned, at first it was like, I'm trying to do everything media related. And then over time you've learned, I'm trying to get more specific and lasered in on what I do well. Like why? Like what was the evolution of coming to that realization? How did you realize that trying to do more was actually less?
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess one of the most simple way to answer is, well, it's like they say, you can be a jack of all trades, but then you're a master of none. And so I kind of found that being my issue. The other thing was, if you're going to scale a business, especially if you're going to do it on your own, I presently don't have any full time employees. I've taken that approach in the past, and maybe we can talk about the shortcomings and potential benefits of that later. But I'm currently just on my own in terms of I have some contract helper people that I contract work to, but it's just me. If you're going to scale in any way, you have to have effective, more or less, and replicatable, if that's a word,
I think so.
systems and
We're gonna go
processes.
with it.
Yeah, we're going with that. TM. So you have to have those processes that you can replicate, you can duplicate. And when you're doing that for so many different types of, in my case, different services and service offerings, well, it becomes really difficult to manage all of those, build and manage all those systems. So for me, it's been about, oh, this is actually something I can do, that I have a very effective system and process with the podcast production, for example. Everything from, setting a date to record, to getting an editing workflow, to getting a thumbnail designed for the YouTube channel, and then uploading and scheduling everything. I've got a good pipeline for how that
Yeah.
works now.
Right.
And to me, why I've chosen to focus on that one, particularly at least for 2025, if not beyond, is that is the one that I can get kind of the most return for time invested. And it's also a great value for the end customer, in my opinion. So
Yes.
that's essentially. Now that said, the only reason I'm able to do the podcasting thing now, is because for a lot of the other things I mentioned with the websites and maybe graphic design services, I've already built systems that are in place that are running well. So now I can kind of move and focus on the next thing. It just, early on, it took me a while to figure out that you kind of got to focus in on one. It's not that you can't, it's just ideal if you can kind of focus in on refining and perfecting as best you can one system at a time, then moving on to the next. So that's kind of my short and then long answer of why I'm taking the approach I am now.
Yeah, I think, and to extend that to, whether you listening are running a business, or you're in ministry, or whatever you do, there's an element of, like, there's a lot of fear. It feels very scary to say, I'm actually going to focus in on this, and I'm not going to do all this other stuff, because you feel like you're losing out on opportunity. I'll just similarly speak from personal experience. I'm in that same evolution for myself, and I can't say that I'm doing a great job of it now, because I think my struggle for where I'm at is, I just want to help people when it comes to finances. I
Hmm.
want to give advice. I want to be able to offer my services. And the thing that I find hardest to do is to tell people, no, it's not
Yeah.
a good fit,
Yeah.
because I feel like I'm being a jerk. Somebody
Yeah.
reaches out to me, and they're like, "Hey, I'd like to get," and it's like, that's not really what I do, or that's not the right fit. That's not going to be mutually beneficial. That's not going to be maybe my area of expertise. And I think what you're speaking to is, like, now, like with the podcast production. So you build a routine and a workflow that actually you're really good at now, and it actually stands out and it differentiates you, because now somebody that needs that specific thing, it makes it a lot more obvious to them that you're the guy. Whereas opposed, if
Mhm.
you said, well, I do podcast production, but I also do these 12 other things. Okay, well, I don't need those 12 other things. I need this one thing. And
Mhm.
what it actually, and weirdly, I think and this is something that in the finance industry, with what you do, with a lot of things, when you focus in on that one thing, you're actually making it easier for a lot of people to say yes, because to begin with, a lot of people were already saying no. We just didn't realize it. And I think
Yeah.
that's part of the realization. Um, okay, so as far as time challenges, you're running a business by yourself. What have been the biggest challenges that you run into as far as time management for yourself?
Yeah, so probably for me, I could say a lot of things. Some days Yeah, things like, oh man, I'm tired, I want to take a nap. So when you're self-employed and you're working from home, that temptation is actually a lot more real than if you're like in an office with other people keeping you accountable. But I'm usually able to resist that one pretty well, just drink another cup of coffee and move on. But in all seriousness, the one that I probably struggle with most, and I've got a pretty good balance of it now, is I'm in the service business, so I'm serving clients, but I also, it's the work in the business versus work on the business thing.
Mhm.
But I've also got to do things to, like I talked about earlier with those systems, building those, managing those, making those, keeping those efficient, because you can't really just, in my experience, build a system and leave it alone. You've got to like keep an eye on maintenance, make sure it's running right, make sure things aren't broken. So it's working on the business, working on the business, and then, obviously we're finding time to do things like, we're recording a podcast right now. I've got a podcast that I a co-host. I've got several podcasts now that I'm managing for other people. Like, okay, I've got to find time to work with those clients, but also got to find time to record stuff for my own podcast. And then I got to find new clients. You can't just sit and not grow and not find more clientele. So
Right.
I've got to come up with marketing strategies and time to have sales calls and things like that. So yeah, that's been the thing, and the way that I've kind of, that's been the problem. My solution to that for the most part has been, I have days that are dedicated to working on the business, and I've days that are dedicated to working in the business. So
Mm.
for example, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, middle of the week tends to be when I'm doing a lot more client management. I'm working on their projects and editing for them and having meetings. I only take, for the most part, with some exception, only take calls and meetings during those 3 days. And then Mondays and Fridays is more often my work, I guess, would be on the business days where I'm working on the systems, developing things. And then likewise with that, I lean heavier to focusing on deeper work that like that in the mornings, and then in the
Yep.
afternoons, like I said, that's when I do my meetings and my calls and things like that. So that's kind of my little rubric, if you will,
Yeah.
of how I work on the things.
On the Mondays and Fridays, when you're entering more of that creative space and you're thinking more about the things that need to be done to move your business forward, like that's really important work and it's really valuable work when you think in terms of the return on your time. How, like, what's helped you to get into that space? Is there a routine? Are there tools? Are there little tricks that you've used to be like, okay, I want to lock in on a Monday morning and really think about what I'm going to do in 2025 to bring in 10 new clients or whatever?
Mhm,
Like
mhm.
what's helped you to enter that space and feel like I'm getting really effective and I'm shutting out all the other distractions.
Yeah, so in general, that probably comes down more to my daily routine as opposed to what I focus on just those Mondays and Fridays. Because regardless of if I'm, working on my business or in my business, I need to be in that certain headspace regardless.
Mhm.
So again, I talked about how I protect my mornings. My mornings are those are for me to work. It's not for me to talk to people, not for me to take phone calls. Again, some exception to that, but by and large, that's that more. So for me, it's having the same Monday to Friday schedule every day. Because again, the temptation when you're self-employed, I remember when I first started, I was like, man, this is the greatest. I can stay up late watching movies, doing whatever. And then I can just wake up whenever I want to the next day because, hey, I don't have a boss now. I'm self-employed. Well, I, about 6 months into that, I realized that's just not going to work. And so now I get up earlier than I did, ever did when I actually went to an office.
Yeah.
And so for me, it's, yeah, I get up, I do make sure to do, most days I try to do some type of exercise, get the blood pumping. I get ready, take my daughter to school, and then I usually find myself at a coffee shop. I got a Starbucks here near my daughter's school. That's where I start my morning, and most of the time I'm there until around lunchtime before I head home, and then take my, like I said, if I've got any calls for the day or anything like that, that's what I do. So I guess for me, it's a little bit of a different answer than maybe what you asked, but for me, it's about every day making sure I have that routine, because it doesn't matter what I've got to do for that day. I'm finding myself in a place that, like, for the thing for me is the coffee shop. That's like focus place for me. Like, I
Yeah.
know there's other people around, but there's something for me about like smelling the coffee, drinking the coffee. I can just really drill in and focus in on doing work there. So that's kind of
Yeah.
how I get in that headspace.
You said earlier, like when 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 you started the business, it was like, oh great, I don't have a boss. I have a lot of flexibility. But then ultimately, you've come back around to having a pretty structured week, and maybe even more structured than a manager might, more structure than a manager might impose on you, that you've
Hmm.
imposed on
Hmm.
yourself to say, I'm only going to do this on these days, and this is going to be my routine. Talk to me about like that that process of like kind of coming full circle to being like actually having to become your own manager.
Yeah,
That's
yeah. I mean, the in a nutshell, it just comes down to realizing I finally I kind of grew up. I mean, that's really what happened. Was, like I said, when I first started my business, I would have been what, like 25 years old. I'd really only worked one job, which was at the church I was at. I'd had some summer jobs and, dabbled in some, kind of, I guess, work while I was at college, and, did things like that, but not a serious, 40-hour a week, 9 to 5 or whatever you want to call it job. So I didn't have a ton of work experience. And again, like, this is more about my personal life, but yeah, I was kind of a mess. I was unhealthy. At one time I weighed over like 350 pounds, and didn't care what I was eating, didn't care about, I remember my first year working, I was working at a church, but also that had Christian school. So I had to teach. And I mean, I'd kill myself staying up till 2 and 3 in the morning, getting ready for, preparing my lessons and things, which I thought, I patted myself on the back so hard for that. I'm like, wow, look at you, like, you're so dedicated. But it's like, yeah, but you're killing yourself. Like, you're not getting any sleep. And again, I'm eating and not taking care of my body and whatnot. And so, all that to say, like, it's a few things happened. One of the things is I had a kid. Like, you have a kid and you realize, oh, here's this tiny little life form that is now dependent on me. And so, just a combination of a bunch of things, realize I have to grow up and I have to get disciplined. I have to take care of myself and take care, because by taking care of myself, I'm taking care of my family, I'm taking care of my business, and everything from there. So, yeah, that's kind of what I guess, probably more of a philosophical, broad answer than
yeah,
what people might be looking for. But the biggest thing I tell anybody is, I really wish that the person I became in my late 20s and early 30s, that I could have activated that earlier, which is just simply, again, you have to be disciplined for the health of yourself and those around you, and your work and all of that.
yeah,
And take life seriously. I mean, you knew me in college. Like, I still love to have a good time, but there's sometimes where it was like, Luke, dude, like, do you have a serious bone in your body? And so yeah, I just had to grow up. Growing up really
yeah.
helps.
Well, what I'm hearing in all of that is like you have to take your own success and discipline more important. Like it has to be more important to you than it is to somebody else. And I
Yeah.
think what I've seen in my very limited experience, but I think the great blessing of being in business for yourself is that there's a better system of check engine lights for what
Mm.
needs to change. When you're in a job, when you're in an occupation where if you're not performing up to your own standards or to your own capabilities, the negative results of that are are dulled.
Yeah.
Then
Yeah.
there's not a lot of motivation to want to change. In other words,
Hmm.
like when I was a teacher, right? Like if I wasn't performing as a teacher and doing the things that I needed to be the best type of teacher I could be, that might show up in parents, complaining. That might show up in evaluations from the school principal being, subpar. That might show up in having more difficulties in class with disruption from students or those types of things. Like there might be some things, but it wouldn't affect me personally all that much because my paycheck is still going to be the same and I'm still having to
Hmm.
show up at the same times every day. And so the negative consequences of me not having that personal discipline are muted. They're dulled
Hmm.
for me. And I
Yes.
think what happens a lot of times is people are in situations where they're just not even realizing that. They have an employee mentality where it's, okay, what's the bare minimum requirement of me in this job? And as long as I'm meeting that, I'm happy.
Mhm.
But similarly, on the converse side, the rewards for overachieving can also be dulled or can be negated somewhat, because it's
Yeah.
like, if I was the best teacher I knew how to be, and I was phenomenal in my lesson plans and in my lectures and all of that stuff, okay, but I still have to be there at the same time. And my
Mhm.
pay is probably still going to be the same. Now, maybe, right,
Mhm.
hey, you're doing a great job, and you give you a raise or whatever. But like, the upward mobility of that is also is also limited. And what I
Yep.
think, what you realize immediately when you go into business for yourself is, wow, I reap all the benefits and the
Yeah.
consequences of
Yep.
my
High
behavior. And
risk, high reward.
yes, and you feel it, and the feedback's immediate. Like, you
Yeah.
feel it in real time. And I think that's one of the greatest blessings and lessons that we learn in this, is you start to realize, oh, there's things that I was doing before. It's like, why are you doing that? Like,
Mhm.
that's not a good use of your time. When
Yep.
you have that employee mentality, it's kind of like, well, I'm just, you know, running out the clock. I'm doing
Exactly.
busy
Yep.
work for the sake of doing busy work. And then all of a sudden, when you realize, oh, I have nobody telling me that I have to do this, why am I doing this? And I think that's what I'm hearing in your answer is,
Mhm.
okay. So let's move here really quick. I want to get into, what are like specific tools that you've used and that you've loved for efficiency, for time management. Give us a few things that you're using right now that you would say, man, this is awesome. Whether you're in business for yourself or not, that's like, you need to check this out.
Yeah, yeah. So, if you've listened to me, if there's any hap crossover audience from my podcast, YouTube stuff, you've probably heard some of this before. And I know, Nate, you and I, we've talked about this before. So if I'm repeating it, oh well, it's probably because you need to hear it. Um, I'm going to start with, it's in no particular order, but for me, Calendly is really great. Calendly is a game changer. So managing your calendar is a nightmare. I used to do it manually. Like, if somebody were to reach out to me and be like, hey, let's get on a call. Okay, cool, I'm free at this time and this time. And then they're like, well, no, me, I'm this will work but that won't work. And it's just, it's such a headache. So I've set up a Calendly. They have a free version. I use the paid version because I've got because then it allows me to create different types of kind of events and things like that. And so I just send somebody a link and I say, hey, yep, I'd love to talk to you. Here's my calendar. And it's not just eliminating the back and forth. It's just allowing me to manage my time, like manage my time without me having to think about it. So all those restraints I told you about, where I don't do talk calls on Mondays and Fridays, and I only do them in the afternoons, that's built in. Like, it's not going to
Right.
show an availability on Monday or Friday. It's not going to show an availability for anything before noon on Tuesday through Thursday. So that for me is huge. Like, I use it. I can't remember the last time I used just manually talking to schedule something. Even for like this podcast conversation, Nate, like we sent you, it was a Calendly portal and we picked the time and boom. So it is that for me is gonna, like, I guess it's gonna lead the way because it's the one for me that consistently is a reminder to me of, oh wow, like if I had to manage that, I think that's the how you value something is, okay, what would I do without this? Without
Yeah.
this, like, it would be a nightmare.
Yeah, I use Calendly too. It's worth every penny. Another thing that I love about it is you can build in a workflow to
Yep.
send reminders, or if it's
Yep.
something where it's like, okay, in preparation for this meeting, I'm going to need A, B, and C, so they can be sent with that link. So
Yep.
you can like, if you're doing the podcast recording, it's like, okay, we schedule it, and then it sends a reminder email to me 24
Yes.
hours ahead of time or an
Yeah.
hour ahead of time. And so even just following up with people and being like, hey, we still good for such and such
Hmm.
time, even that gets
Yeah.
eliminated. Yeah, huge help. I love that.
Yeah, my Calendly reminders, I have those. I mean, it's probably annoying to people who schedule a meeting with me, but the truth is my no-show rate is incredibly low.
Yeah.
Because if you don't do a reminder, like, honestly, there's a 50-50 shot they'll forget and won't even show up. So I do text reminders, I do the email reminders, and like you said, yeah, even follow-up emails. So like after the fact, I can automatically send out an email that says, "Hey, thanks for your time. If you want to, if we need to talk more, here's a link to schedule another time." Like there's endless possibilities, really. So yeah, Calendly is a winner for sure.
Well, Luke, we're going to continue the conversation. This is going to be a good place for us to pause episode 1. We're going to continue next week with episode 2, and Luke's going to share with us some more of his favorite tools and tips for productivity and time saving. Thanks, Luke, and we'll see you guys on next week's episode.